All right, I'm going to call the meeting to order.
Turn the lights up. They are on. They are on.
Yeah. Everybody rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda for today's special meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion passes. Only remarks I have for today. The purpose of the special meeting is to discuss the declarations and restrictions that have been submitted by Marvin Steen on behalf of Triple Crown Properties. So if there are any public comments, they need to relate to that topic. So are there any public comments? Joe?
Joe Reynolds, 84. This project was approved about 15 years ago. We had a referendum in relation to the YMCA into the fold. In the past referendum, by the fold. Part of the, and I'm not sure if this has to do with the declarations or not, part of the deal was, and I know it's Marvin, that OPA would receive so much per EDU in each place. And I talked to Marvin a couple years ago, he said that OPA would still receive that money. And I just wanted to report that anything goes. Hopefully, we're still getting that money per EDU.
And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Marvin, but I think it's $1,600 per ETU.
6,500.
Yeah, 65.
65.
There you go.
Per EDU.
Yeah, it's contractual, so it's, yep. Okay.
Oh, thank you.
Any other?
But the buyers pay the ocean buyers pay
Right,
yearly fee.
right. Are there any other public comments? Okay, so Joe Moore and Chris are going to go ahead and present the declarations and restrictions, the proposed declarations and restrictions. And I think what we would do afterwards is I'll waive Robert's Rules of Order, and then we can have a discussion on any questions regarding the DRs if you've had, I'm sure you've had a chance to review them. So Joe and Chris.
Okay. I'm Joe Moore, and my partner Chris Woodley is with me today. And from time to time, we represent Ocean Pines Association with local council. In this case, the declaration of restrictions that you all have before you, a draft was prepared by Tom Coates, Esquire, who represents Mr. Steen. And once we received it, Chris vetted the restrictive covenants as presented. They were intended originally to start with Section 19, which of course is one of the villages of Ocean Pines, which are the more recent iteration of the restrictions. They are more updated from the old Boise restrictions in the earlier part of Ocean Pines. Once we got it, we added, for instance, the short-term rental provision that you all have discussed with regard to what will be submitted to the members for their determination. The restricted covenants in the villages of Ocean Pines also have the right to fine, which are not in Boise. So I think you all have or have reviewed the red line version, which were the revisions that we had made to Mr. Coates' draft. We then sent it back to him, and on behalf of Mr. Steen, Tom Coates has agreed, subject to your review, to what we have posts, and then we will be ready for execution by Mr. Steen and Ocean Pines Association of the Declaration of Restrictions in Section 20. So basically, we are in a slightly altered circumstance of the form of restrictive covenants that you all have previously, I say you all collectively, meaning the Board of Directors, have previously approved for submission. They will be recorded among the land records of Worcester County, and then Mr. Steen's Section 20 will be subject to those restrictive covenants, and all owners therein will be subject to it. So basically, we submit them to you for your consideration, and we're here to answer any questions that you have, if we're able to do so.
Okay, with that, I'm going to waive Robert's Rules of Order, and we can have a discussion about the DRs. So who'd like to go first? Anybody have questions or comments? Doug?
I do. Actually, I went through this in great detail, and one of the things I did is I compared it to Section 13, which was one of the old ones, because I wanted to make sure I saw what was either included or excluded as we moved forward. And I found they're all just basically questions as to, why there's a difference where, the new Section 20 language is included in Section 20. It's not included in one of the old ones, and vice versa. So, for example, like in Section 3, okay, on there, if the old DR had some additional sentences regarding clarifying improvements. So are we saying that they're no longer required? Okay, if you look at the last couple sentences in Section 3, I don't know, I know that you don't have a copy of DRs for Section 13, so we can take this offline, but I'm just trying to give you a sense of, where I was going with some of the, information we were looking at.
And the other thing that we brought, to be very forthright about it, is our proposed Section 20. So
Right.
those that you are asking about, we'll review and compare, and if they need to be.
Yeah, basically my premise was I wanted to compare to the older DRs to see what differences there are between an existing DR and the proposed new DRs for the Section 20. I thought it was interesting, if you look at Section 4, the new Section 4 of the new DRs, you'll note that there's more restrictions on timeshare, family daycare, bed and breakfast, which are not contained in the old one. I would assume that's by design.
That the new sections in Section 4 are the subject of a combination of your determination with regard to the short-term rentals and the amendments to the old restrictions which were done when Chuck Haynes was president, and they are in a totally separate document, in a separate area of the land records, because they were passed by referendum in probably, I don't know, 1990 or something like that. So the section with regard to timeshare and all that is in an amendment to the old Boise.
Okay.
Well, and let me jump in with Doug on this. Section 4A is one of the areas that I highlighted too, and the area that concerns me is the end of it, where it says nothing herein is intended to preclude the use of any dwelling or any lot or home office, or to preclude any dwelling from having an apartment or suite with or without kitchen facilities for occupancy by an immediate or extended family member of the family owning the dwelling, or the occupancy for domestic employees of the family owning the dwelling. My concern is, it sounds to me like what we're talking about is an in-law suite, which could include separate entrance if it went to the ARC. And if the board decides we're okay with that, we need to understand the wording that we have in here. There's no way to enforce the fact that it would only be for basically immediate or extended family. If there's we're because we're dealing with the short-term rental stuff, it just jumped out at me that this could be an apartment that was being rented, and we would really have no way of controlling it.
No, it's clear that it's meant to be what we call mother-in-law apartment or a family unit. And this is not needed with regard to these restrictions and other restrictions, but it is clear that it must be occupied by a family member. Family member is defined in the Worcester County Code, and it does not include nieces, nephews, uncles, aunts. It includes direct rather than collateral relatives of the owner of the property.
And I agree with that, Joe. My point is that we would have no way of enforcing the reality of it.
And if you choose to remove it, then we'll pass that by. All we did was mirror the previous ones because the previous board decided to go. But that's up to you all.
And that's
And again, enforcement obviously is always an issue
correct.
in the restricted covenants, but again, that's beyond Chris and my pay grade.
Correct. And that's something that the board needs to consider, whether or not this provision is one that we want to keep in here or that we want to have removed. So that's something that, we probably should get a consensus right now since we're talking about it. So thoughts, comments?
I have no issue.
Frank?
So we're dealing with the notion of enforcement,
Right.
and that's, quite frankly, sometimes it's a very subjective term, because your interpretation of how that, residency is being occupied is always going to be called into question. I think at this point, I don't have anything off the top of my head that would be concrete. I think we just have to recognize the fact that space, if it's designated as a quote-unquote in-law suite, is probably flexible. And we just have to understand that unless there's some egregious misuse of, that, original intent of it being a family unit rather than a rental unit, then, we should be able to do something. But I think for the most part, we just need to be aware of it. I don't have anything that I could add to say this is what we should do in case somebody breaks this covenant.
What?
Well, I'm thinking that if it's, it'd fall under the short-term rental guidelines, should that, we change the other DRs for the enforcement of other things. And so I'm not concerned about it so much for short-term rental. And, I agree with Doug that it's just kind of something that, since it's in other DRs, it's something that we need to be aware of and also be aware that there may be challenges of enforcement.
Cammie?
I'm just curious because I haven't completed a good review of this since I've been in court all day today. But my question is will this neighborhood be a part of the Ocean Pines Corporation?
Sure.
It will be. Okay, so if we're going
It will
to,
be annexed
It-
into Ocean Pines. That's where the referendum was that Joe was referring to. And I think you're right, it was either 12 or 14 projects that referendum passed, but it will be part of Ocean Pines, paying Ocean Pines Association assessments and having all the obligations and the benefits of membership as well.
then will there be consistency in the DRs regarding short-term rentals and use of amenities? I mean, will there be consistency across all areas?
Well, let me say this. At this point in time, you all have not held your referendum on the short-term rentals, which, as I understand it, are going to be necessary to amend all of the restricted covenants in all the sections in which it doesn't exist now. This is to get ahead of that issue and have them here. And if it failed elsewhere, then it's up to you all. I don't think Mr. Steen has any problem whichever way you go, because it is for the benefit of your enforcement with regard to maintaining the residential sanctity, if you will.
So, Joe, would that be by the 51%, or would that be the uniform standard throughout the corporation?
The amendment of the Declaration of Restrictions, now understand, it's not necessary if you all leave it in here. We put it in here so we didn't have to go through that. Because Marvin owns 100%, and I suggest to you he vote for it, right, Marvin? With regard to the other ones, it is 50%
Plus one, right?
and it is in each individual section. You all, I think, have seen the amendment that was done, as I say, back when Chuck Haynes was president. And in each section, the vote was counted, and in each section, a separate restriction amendment was filed in the land records with the vote of each section. So that is what you all will go through in the short-term rentals as well.
Understood, and thank you for that
Well,
explanation.
the difference here too is that this is really not addressing the short-term rental issue. This is addressing, the reality of it is an in-law suite that could be used
As an,
as a short-term rental. So-
understood.
So the question is whether or not we wish to allow in-law suites, basically, and understanding that we're not going to be able to enforce it anyway.
So do you know how many sections allow in-law suites in the DRs?
I think it's the newer ones, not the old
Okay.
ones.
What, 15, 16, 17, 18,
Yeah,
and
15
19?
up.
Right,
Yeah.
we mirror the villages of Ocean Pond. That's where we, for lack of a better word, we
I did
updated
15.
Boise restrictions way back in 1996.
Right.
And they were formulated for the older section. This is intended to formulate those which were agreed upon in concept by the board at a much later time, probably 15 or 20 years later.
Frank, you have any comments?
I think it should mirror the newer sections of the bonds.
And my own position is, I agree that we probably, this mirrors section 19. I think we ought to go ahead with it. I think we just I wanted to bring this up, understanding that we're probably not going to be able to enforce it anyway. So I don't have a problem with in-law suites.
I do, Larry, I do have one comment. Just generally, under section 7, okay, which is item R, we have kind of an ongoing issue right now in the community because the last time the ARC guidelines were changed, wood-burning fire pits were permitted under the ARC guidelines. Burning of wood is not permitted under the DRs. So we have a case right now of where we have a set of guidelines established by a committee that is not consistent with the DRs. So that's one issue that has to be addressed separately. But this particular issue in section 20, if we want to permit fire pits, we need to have wording in there that no outside burning of wood except in ECC approved fire pits with permits from the CPI department would be permitted. And that's the wording that Public Works would prefer to have in there if we want to have fire pits permitted in that area.
And I agree. I know there's been all this conversation about fire pits, and quite honestly, I think that, and I've discussed it with the police department, the fire department, and they're fine as long as they're in fire pits and the people aren't just having holes in the ground burning in the backyard. So my own feeling is that I don't have a problem with having fire pits, which would be, go along with what ARC is looking for. And before we, just want to bring up one other point, that we're talking about the ECC here, and it is really the Architectural Review Committee. So I'd like to see it ECC and then or ARC.
Well, and again, in all of your restrictions, it's still called the ECC, so we mirror that.
And that's correct.
We know that the formulation has changed.
There's a stipulation. ARC.
It will be, that's fine.
That's a minor change, but the reality of it is, if we go back to change the other declarations, that's probably a change that should be made. Because it is the Architectural Review Committee at this point.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. We just mirror the other ones that are there. And this deal, we need that, get that language.
I will send it to you.
Okay, Doug, I interrupted you, but go ahead.
No, that's okay. I mean, I think that's what this whole process
Right.
is for. We want to kind of have this interactive conversation. I did notice that, I just had a question on, wait a minute, we are at ECC 5B. Says, no clearing or pruning of any trees or shrubs or any alteration of any lot should be permitted any time. You know, now there's another stipulation where you can't remove a tree that's greater than 6 inches of diameter. How do we enforce this? Because I know this section was not in, and again, I use section 13 by design to compare. That's not in section 13's DRs. So clearly I'm in a very, I want to make sure we understand, so the homeowner understands what he or she can or cannot do. Clearing or pruning of bushes or shrubs. Okay, so I got a rosemary bush in front of it. So you tell me I can't clear it? I mean, that's what this is telling me, right? And I think we need a little bit of clarification of exactly what this is and what the intent of this particular thing is. In other words, I just think we need to discuss that because, we'll be as, well, hey, I got this bush out in front of my house. So, the construction crew didn't clear. According to the covenants, I can't remove it. I mean, and then we have attorneys.
Well, again, that's not a legal issue, that's all we did was hear those restrictions that have been approved by a previous board. And, if there is, I recognize that if I'm pruning my tree, I don't think I'm gonna get a fine by the ARC, but if you all have a concern with that, that's your decision.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pragmatic approach to this particular. I mean, I just pointing out, I don't think it needs to be changed, but we just need to be prepared that, that's in there and we might get questioned.
Doug, one thing, I can't, there are no trees. No trees, all field.
But there may be at some point, Marvin, down the line, years from now, there may be.
10 years down the road, there may be a tree and they decide to, house gets sold and the person decides to clear it out. I just want to make sure we don't run into any trouble with it. So,
Before we move on from there, I had a question on 4C, the daycare operations. And it's my understanding there's some other statutory language that may need to be added to that. So instead of wasting everybody's time at this point, we can talk about that later. Okay, Doug?
okay. Where was I? So in 5F, I thought this was interesting, and I just wanted to bring it up for everybody's sort of edification. Is if you look at 5 at the very bottom, the last sentence, subject to the appeal process set forth in paragraph 5G. Okay, in the old DRs, it says the ECC's decision was final, and there was no appeal process. Okay, in the old ones, and in the newer ones there are. Okay. So it goes back to, and I see Jim Trummel in the audience, this is our conversation that we had about in the bylaws about what's the legal precedence. Can someone say, wait a minute, I don't agree with the ECC. I live in section 13, my legal, if the ECC says no, you're done.
That was the subject of considerable debate with the boards that were determining the issue of the right of appeal, because even though the board disagreed with the decision of then the ECC, now the ARC, the old restrictions provided there was no appeal. The board, when they were determining the newer version of the sections, wanted to make sure that someone who was aggrieved by the decision of the ARC could appeal to the board, and the board was the final determiner. Anecdotally, I can tell you one time, the board met with what was in the ECC and asked them to change their decision, and they refused. So the board terminated the members of the ECC and got them approved. That's a pretty heavy-handed way of resolving a disagreement. But it happens. So instead of doing that, where you lose good committee members, the determination was made that board's decision was final, not the ARC.
All right, we have the legal background to be able to do that. In other words, and then in section 20, they could say, nope, sorry, the board said we're going to override the decision from ARC. You may do what you need to do.
It was intended
Okay.
to have.
We got to, that's another one we got to clean up.
Yeah, and
The other ones.
quite honestly, I had 5G down there. Here's one of the items too, whether or not, because we've talked about the appeal process and some of the things that have occurred over the last year and a half, and whether or not we wanted to have this appeal process. So,
I don't know whether Jim wrote that in these new ones or not, but in any event, they were here. They are here for a purpose, and that is to have the board make the final determination, not the ARC.
so this is one of the issues. Again, I wanted to get input from the rest of the board about the appeal process. So Frank, you have any, since you're the liaison to the
I
ARC?
have a question about this. So what you're saying, the board, as of this time, does have the right to override the ARC committee?
In what I call the village's devotion ponds.
Certain sections.
It's in there.
You're only-
It's not in the poison. So somebody in section 3 or section 5
You can't.
has to abide by the decision of the ARC.
So it depends on which section you're in as to whether the board, whether there's an appeal process to the board.
Right.
The newer sections have the appeal process in there, and of course we mirror those.
That was one of the things that was discussed in the ARC meetings, was that actually the ARC committee felt that the board should have the final say, but it had to go to the board, I guess, to change the DRs or somewhere along the way to make it appropriate.
Right. Well,
Right.
and that was not in the amendment which was intended to prohibit timeshares. That was really, there were two issues in the amendment where everybody went through the whole thing, timeshares and the parking of trucks in the community. At that time, the circumstances of who had the final word was not an issue, so the voicing restrictions were not amended. The village restriction didn't need to be amended because the appeal process is in there.
So again, this is one of the items that
So
we
in
probably.
the new ones,
The new ones, yeah, the newer ones, there is
the
an
new
appeal
ones have the
process.
appeal process. This one's going to have the appeal process also.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Correct, and when we go ahead and do the mailings on the DRs, it's probably something we should change for the earlier section.
We're going to have a whole litany of things
Right.
we can do to get things consistent.
Any other comments on this, on the appeal process? Okay, Doug, you have anything else?
Yeah, I got a whole list. In section 5, under the ECC, the old DRs had two sections about, one deals with the declarant shall be responsible in any way for any defects in plans or specifications submitted. In other words, if the architect or the contractor, does something, we can't be held responsible for the defects, so on and so forth. And then there's another one here about the whatever committee shall approve plans for residence dwelling, pier structures, and other things, extending lines into the waterway, and so on and so forth. I assume that since there's no waterway, that section is not applicable. All right, but F, and again, is about the declarant shall be responsible for the defects in plans or specifications. That's not in this section 20. So is that by design? Is that because there's some kind of liability issue, or should we consider putting it in?
I didn't compare the two.
Oh,
so
okay.
I'm not sure. I can't answer that, but we'll,
Okay. Yeah. I'm in section 13, the DR for section 13, and it is section 5 F. And G, I think, because it deals with waterways, is not applicable. Okay. Continue.
Yeah, I got, well, I'm on my list, I'm at section 7, general prohibitions and requirements under this document. And I asked Marvin before we started whether, it was my understanding Marvin is not going to be building any homes himself. So this basically talks about having a parking access area adjacent to model homes under 7B. and with no restriction on that parking lot, basically. And then 7K talks about model homes. And Marvin is not going to be doing any building himself, but there is the possibility that he could sell a block of lots and a builder could put up a model home. So my concern, I don't think we want to have a parking lot. You know, if you think about model homes, they'll have additional parking space because these DRs also state that there's no parking on the street. I don't have a problem with a parking lot being there, but after, we have to put some limitation on how long it can stay. So I would suggest that that we limit, if in fact model homes do get built, and whoever does that has a parking lot next to those model homes, that the parking lot be removed.
Well, and I understand what you're saying, Mr. President, but you see in section K, it is a written permission obtained from local change that to the ARC, so they can make those conditions as well, but if you wanted it more specific.
I think since it's in here, we should put the limitation that when the model home is sold, then the parking lot should be removed.
That seems to be the course of action that I've seen in touring around with my daughter as she has purchased, that they are paved over and grass put in them.
Again, if we don't have it in here, I'm not sure. Someone would have the argument that, well, I've got a parking lot for 10 cars at my home. I want to keep it that way. And I don't think that's what we want to see in the
You
development.
don't want to leave that to the ARC.
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
I agree.
I have, Doug, I don't know where you're at, but I'm on now section 8. This is a minor thing, section 8B, where it talks about the official Ocean Pines publication. I think we ought to add into there Ocean Pines publication because we really don't have one, or website. Try to bring that up into the 21st century.
Yeah, actually, I one point of interest. This is really not an issue, but if you note section 6, talk about size and placement of residents and structures. In the old DRs, you only needed to have 1,000 square feet of structured, covered, heated, and so on and so forth. Now it's 1,800 square feet. Just a point of interest. I thought it was interesting. In section 7, they also changed it. The construction had to be completed in 9 months rather than 6 months. That was another interesting point of information. But in section 7, all right, it doesn't contain the language, and I think Marvin's already answered this question. There's language in the old DR, section 8Q, that says that there's a restriction on removal of trees greater than 6 inches in diameter. But Marvin says since there's no trees there, I guess this is we don't have to worry about about that particular restriction. Again, just noting, differences between the old and the new is section, your section 8 here and the new one doesn't contain the section from the old DRs regarding drainage, dredging, and maintenance. And I would assume that's by design because you're not near a waterway. And I guess it's not going to be required in the future. Larry, do you have anything else on section 8?
No, I'm good.
On section 9, the last section that you had here has a reference to, let me pull this page, a reference to the final forest conservation plan. All right, I would assume that's a new requirement, a new law in Maryland state or federal law that has to do with we have to be compliant with it. It's 9G in the new one. So that's a new section that's in there that isn't in the old one. Is that an absolute requirement going forward that, because of some federal law?
I think it's whatever's on. Yeah, that's intended to include the requirements that are submitted by
Okay, yeah, it's just a question.
That's why the blanks are there, because that will be reported.
Good, okay. Okay. I mean, I'm occupying the meeting here.
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I got some other things too, but go ahead.
So just in general, and again, I think one of them is due to the fact that they're not near a waterway, but there are 3 sections in the old DRs. One of them was reservation of easement for operations of waterway. I assume that's not applicable, right? So we don't need to include it. The other one was rights of first refusal, which was talking about transfers of property.
And that
That's-
has been so universally rejected. No
Okay.
one has the right to pursue.
All right. And then the third one was charges for water and sewer services. That were in the old ones, and I didn't see it in here, and I wondered where we were covering that.
Not in here because you all have turned that over to Worcester County.
Okay. All right.
When the voyage restrictions were there, Maryland Marine Utilities was a privately owned utility that actually built your sewer plant, but that's long as it's turned over to the county.
Okay. And believe it or not, I only have one more question. That was, you added section 17, rights of mortgagees, that's not in the old DRs. Is there, can you help me understand what the purpose of that is and how it makes sure we protect the ocean pines and lakes?
And then to the rights of mortgagee,
Yeah, section 17.
well, that's intended to comply with the Fannie Mae requirement.
All right.
Because we have had, fairly recently, an issue in Interlink where, because there was not a recorded turnover, agreement, that's because they never agreed. And I'm gonna record the deed, because there was a lender that refused to lend in there because we didn't comply with Fannie Mae requirements. So that's the intent. of
Okay,
that.
very good. That's all I had.
Okay, I have 11D. And it's the DB. I think you have OPA may file a notice, and I think it's record a notice. I don't think it's file. I think record would be correct. We're on 11DB, small b. And then also fees and interest, because we are collecting interest too. Reasonable attorney's fees and interest.
I'm not seeing where your recorded sections of these stuff in the
Are you at the bottom of page 17?
It's at the middle of 17, or the bottom paragraph of 17.
Because the Maryland Contract Lien Act provides for payment of it. But if you want to put it in.
We want to put it in there.
I'm sorry, where did you have?
That's section 11D and small letter B. Subsection B. It's about halfway down. It says the OPA may publish the name of delinquent members in a list of delinquent members or by any other means of publication. And the OPA may file, it should be record, a notice that it is the owner of the lien to secure payment of unpaid charges plus costs and reasonable attorney fees and interest. think I have one more. Joe, I'd like you to take a look at 14A and take a look at the wording of the first sentence. And then we can talk about that one.
I should say.
14A. I think it might be a typo in there.
Oh, yeah.
That's all I have on my list. Does anybody else have anything else?
I've got one thing.
Yep.
Just- And Joe, if this is gonna get into the need for a different meeting between us, section 12, number A. As I read that, does that, I guess the question that I would have is it sounds like the board will set the speed limit for the streets in Ocean Pines, and the police will give a ticket for a violation of a DR? Is that correct, or am I reading that wrong?
I think that's probably a question for the chief. They do have the authority to issue a citation under the Maryland citation. But remember, the roads in Ocean Pines are private roads. There's a public easement, but it's not owned by the state of Maryland. And so therefore, the issue was clear that whether or not someone quarreled with the fact that it's not a quote, public road in the state of Maryland, and therefore citations should not be issued, there could still be fines. Respectfully, I think that's a question for the chief, because when the restricted covenants were initially imposed, Ocean Pines was what is called a special police force. And then we got legislation passed in the legislature, which makes the authority of the Ocean Pines Police the same as any other municipality. So that would be for the chief. If he says that something is wrong there, we would certainly have to see to that.
And I think the question, I know we've talked about this, I think the question is, how do they enforce collecting those fines?
Again, that's not a question for us. That's a question for the chief.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments on these DRs?
No.
So I think at this point, yeah. Yes, sure.
And board maintenance, just as we got out. You're aware, Joe, there's a distinct difference between what most people think of the phrase single-family home.
Right.
And what the county defines. The county defines single-family home as having, I believe, up to like 5 different families. There's one, something to that effect.
No, it's 5 persons, not related.
Not related, but
Yeah. And the definition of family, it's not 5 families, Joe, it's 5 persons, not related, 5 persons, not related by blood or marriage, or a family. You have a family of 14, in all seriousness, but it's a family.
but 5 unrelated people is not a person who says I'm a single family. I believe the board would have the option, if you felt like it, to define single-family dwelling to be perhaps what the county defines as family members. So that might be something you want to consider. Some people might think it's an advantage to increase the value of it because you're not going to have unrelated people living next door to your home if you have any true single-family home.
But doesn't this,
Throw it out there. You might want to think.
yeah, but doesn't this document state we're going to comply with all the state, county, yeah. So in essence, we're adopting their definitions in here anyway.
If I'm understanding Joe's, are you saying, Joe, that you think the board should or could consider prohibiting anyone not related living in the same single-family residence with someone else not related?
A single-family home, is only occupied by
A
family
family.
member as defined by
well,
Again,
well,
family member.
it is. A single family home, family is defined in the code as a group of not more than 5 unrelated people or a family related by blood or marriage. And I don't have the code with me, but I think I'm pretty close to that.
Earlier, you were talking about multiple, you said could be having people that are family members, and there was some definition of family member.
There's definition, and I don't have it with me, so I don't know whether the definition is family members or family, but there is a definition.
Not the way, my only point is, can the board of limit occupancy of a home to directly related family members, family cousins, or whatever?
I'm not sure we'd want to
Why
do that.
would we want to do
I,
that?
I think we want to comply with what the county has and the state.
Which is what we've tried to do in the revision of this, is be compliant with.
I understand that. I understand we could be more restrictive, but I mean, I think we're asking for trouble if we do.
Yeah.
My opinion.
And respectfully, I think when you talk about enforcement, I don't know, you want to make everybody show their birth certificate to make sure that.
Blood test.
Are there any more questions? Yeah, Jim?
Jim Fall, Minneapolis Court. This discussion's been about the declarations of restrictions. Is there not a need for what I'm going to call a turnover agreement?
There is. Yeah. And that will come, Jim. But what will happen is the turnover agreement is intended to finalize the authority and ownership of the areas to Ocean Pond. Mr. Steen will put in the roads, he will put in all of the open spaces. The county will then make an inspection, and at that point in time, the county will certify to Ocean Pond, and the turnover agreement will be executed and filed, not recorded, filed in the records of Ocean Pond. So the turnover agreement actually turns over the streets, open spaces, and improvements when Mr. Steen gets them done.
That's all well and good. However, there's some other questions there. In that agreement that's now 2002, it's part of the recorded deed, it's attached to it. If you have such issues as the access will be out on the Gunpoint Road, there's been discussion about access through the remainder of Ocean Pond.
Yeah, the access to Gunpoint Road was prohibited by the county when Mr. Steen got his approval, concept for his site plan approval. It was prohibited.
So the only access is going to be through King Richard?
That's correct. That's correct.
And how about other access external Ocean Pond? In particular through the proposed development of the property for
Well, whether or not it will be, there will be access to 589, if that's your question. I don't think the county is going to allow, well, the state highway administration probably won't allow that, but the access is intended, the access is required to be through King Richard. And again, my recollection may be foggy, but I think that issue was in the referendum as well, where everybody was notified that this access for this subdivision, were it to be annexed, would be from King Richard. Yeah, and Jim, I can tell you, it wasn't with regard to Mr. Steen, but there was a rezoning that occurred in 589, and the Gunpoint Road owner showed up in force and even filed an appeal from the determination of the county commissioners. Nothing wrong with Marvin Steen's subdivision, but they don't win that ring on the Gunpoint Road.
One final comment on the, it's specifically on what was mentioned in the DRs. I don't see any point for the DRs to be discussing model homes. I would think come to some kind of agreement on what happens to these model homes after they're, no longer model homes, parking lots, and that sort of thing.
So, and I just had, since there's been several questions about the turnover agreement process. Joe, can you just run through the who's, what's, when's, and why's?
The original purpose of the turnover agreements were to make sure that when a developer was finished with his development, had no further interest in anything with regard to the maintenance of the properties, the maintenance or care of open spaces and all that, there was a turnover agreement. And as a result of the turnover agreements, in all the sections, with the exception of interlinks, and my file is not as old as I am, but it's not far from it. But it was the Dave Ferguson era in Ocean Pine. And there just was no agreement, but there was a proposed deed, which I found in my file, an original deed, which is now recorded among the land records of Worcester County, which does convey to Ocean Pine the streets and the drainage and the matters set forth on the plat. That's in the deed. But the turnover agreement is intended to formulate the method by which all of the developers' improvements are, number one, inspected, and it was agreed that it would be inspected by the county rather than Ocean Pines, because then it would be an impartial determination of the adequacy of the drainage and all that. And then once that certification is made by the county Public Works Department, then the turnover agreements were signed, and there are, I guess, 18 of them in the files in Ocean Pines Association. But and literally, Ocean Pines Association will get title to those areas which are appropriate for it to be in ownership and maintained. It's the final establishment when Mr. Steve is ready to sell his lots and move on to whatever.
And so then, so I guess I'm looking at it from more of a mechanical, when Marvin, assuming the changes we've discussed, everything's approved, Marvin's looking to start selling these lots in August. He starts selling the lots. At what point do the assessment, the EDU monies come to Ocean Pines? And at what point do the owners of those lots become obligated to the DRs and the bylaws and the covenants of Ocean Pines?
When the declaration of restrictions are recorded, and Ocean Pines is ready to offer membership to Mr. Steen's property owners, then they will pay assessments. If they do not pay assessments, then they don't get the privileges of membership, such as the use of your amenities and that type of thing. So that comes now. Mr. Steen will be allowed to sell his lots when his plats are recorded and the county is satisfied that the roads and drainage are adequate for him to sell. That's the planning staff in Snow Hill. Your function is to accept those items, and I can tell you, and Marvin has done it with Ocean Pines in his other sections that he developed. There is the continuing cooperation of saying, we want you to do this with drainage, or we want you to do that with an open space. So that is a function of Ocean Pines, making sure that you're satisfied with those items before they are turned over and you take ownership of them. But the assessments and the obligations under the Declaration of Restrictions are when it's recorded. So if Mr. Steen owns, I don't know how many box you got in there, Martin, but if he owns 70% of them, then his agreement is in place now with regard to those assessments. And he has agreed that $6,500 will be paid for each EDU when it is needed, as I understand.
So that will happen when the property.
I don't have that's in the agreement that was negotiated 10 years ago. Yeah. Something like that. I didn't bring that.
I understand. So that'll happen when the deeds are recorded then. That's what you're saying.
I think,
That's the financial part of this will take place when the individual deeds are recorded for each lot.
no, and forgive me, I can't answer that because I don't have the agreement that Marvin made on the annexation. All of those items are in the annexation agreement. But again, all we brought was our restricted covenant.
The agreement just covers that the EDUs, there will be a payment of X amount for the EDUs after the EDUs. Doesn't discuss things about when that payment becomes due.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Jim. I read the easement probably a year ago, and that's why I'm asking the question, because I didn't think that there was a timetable for
When
it.
the buyer of the lot from me gets a building permit, he has to pay $6,500. If I sell one lot today, they say I'm recording the plat today, okay? They start paying the $1,000 that day. Immediately.
The assessment,
Then when they build a house,
then they pay the EDU.
that's when you get the $6,500.
Okay. That's what I'm trying to get sorted out here.
I apologize.
Yeah.
We were not asked to bring that.
Yeah, that's all right.
Yeah.
Mr. What, Jim?
Turnover agreement.
Okay.
Oh, I,
Those obligations are set forth in the
Oh,
annexation.
Okay, all right. Are there, yeah, Jim, or Joe? Joe?
Back to the ingress and egress, the old state King Richard Road, but back in the day, there was discussion, and I thought it was true, I could be wrong. I think there was discussion, state road about an emergency entrance and exit from these properties, 1 to 5 and 9, that there would be gates or something, but that road going back to 5 and 9 could be used for emergency purposes, either fire, ambulance, or evacuation.
Exit.
I don't know if that
it's there. It's
is
there.
that part of the agreement?
It's part of being, it's the road there.
All right, are there any further comments or questions?
One comment, okay? I think this points out something. As Doug was going through, I looked. The oldest DR that we have is dated 1968. If you go through, we're 50 plus years. We need to go through, it's very similar to a process with short-term rentals, but to do some general cleanup. Not talking about anything major that's going to shift the axis of the earth, but simple things in terminology that applies to the realities of the law in society today, not 50 years ago.
Yeah, Frank, just a point of mention, if you recall, and you were on the board at the time, we had actually talked about the idea of trying to get the DRs across all the sections consistent with one another. I think we just sort of floated the conceptual notion there, but I think after a while, at some point, we're going to maybe have to step up and see if it makes sense to do that.
And I think
I
that,
think I had told you all that when Tony Hans was president, I was directed to prepare a universal declaration of restriction 1 for the entire subdivision. I got it. Go look at it.
That was too big to take a bite of.
Can I see you after the meeting?
Last time I ever saw the light.
Would it,
It was seriously considered to go out for the universal, that requires 51% of everybody. Right over section by section. I think Art Carmine probably threatened to either jump off the roof or resign if you guys went through that, because he is the chief financial officer at the time, and had to calculate if he vote came in. So, but anyway, yeah, it was there, and it was
Interesting.
considered.
Interesting.
Would
I'm
that
a-
require a referendum, Joe? Or is
Yeah.
it just by
No, not a referendum.
It's by
Just a vote.
That's the
50,
plus
right, okay,
one
all right,
Of each section.
okay.
And then people realize, but we have the universal, we gotta have that section by section, because that's the existing restrictions. So it was a nice concept, but it didn't, and Jim, I don't remember whether you may have been involved. No? Okay.
Joe, you should also be aware, fortunately, through your association members in the section can change the DR in and of themselves
They
without
could.
even talking to the board of directors.
They could, by getting 50 plus 1, 50% plus 1 of the vote. And what was actually done was, once 51% of the lots voted, everybody stopped. I mean, there wasn't any need to keep going in the sense of a referendum to see how many people in the section were going to be there, because once that majority was there, it complied with the amendment provisions, which are in your restrictions.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and reinstate Robert's Rules of Order. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Meeting's adjourned.